Hey everybody, happy Thursday, happy Thirsty Thursday, where I hope you all are joining us with some Sauvignon Blanc. If you're not joining us with Sauvignon Blanc, I hope you're just drinking something really tasty. It is about 90 degrees here in Virginia as I tape this, and so Sauvignon Blanc was just what the doctor ordered. So today's class is all about Sauvignon Blanc. So for the month of June, we're doing each class about a specific grape. We talk about the history of the actual grape, where it came from, what its parentage is, and then what the rest of its family did as it continued to spread throughout the world. We talk about the regions where they come from, the different terroir, which encompasses soil, climate, all of that stuff. And we talk about 4 different wines. We'll go through each different tasting notes for these wines. Talk about why these are classic examples, hopefully, if I pick the right wines, of what these grapes should taste like from these regions. And hopefully they are all delicious. So if you're tuned in live, I'd love to hear who you are, where you're coming from. Just pop into the chat room and jump in and tell me who you are and where you're coming from. If you're watching this later at a recording date, just jump into the actual comment section and tell me that you watched the video and what you thought of it, and if you learned anything new, I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you tasted the wines, which one was your favorite? So tonight we're going to be starting off in the Loire Valley. So we've got 4 different wines. So if you bought the 4-pack of these wines, which you don't have to tune in, I believe education should be free. And so all of these are free and open to the public, these educational videos. But if you bought the 4-pack of the wines that you wanted to taste along with us, they came with these note cards, which has the list of the actual wines. On the back, if you notice, it has like an actual, just like a wine tasting 101, the steps of tasting. If you want to get really geeky about how to go through the proper steps to taste the wine, like the professionals do. So that's the information on the back, my contact information. Obviously, the 4-pack also came with these nifty and handy little wine aroma charts. This is the first time you've seen one of these from my 4-packs. Don't worry, it's not anything you have to memorize. This is just basically a vocabulary word bank. So as you learn and taste wine, and as you learn the vocabulary of tasting wine, that's exactly what your brain is doing. It's learning a new language, basically. It's learning new vocabulary. So in order to do that better, in order to become a more proficient taster, it is best to start with the right vocabulary, just like learning any language. So take this, if you've got it, put it on your refrigerator, and every time you taste wine, just take 15 seconds to try and name something that you're smelling in the wine. If you do that consistently, I'm talking in the course of just a month or 2, you will see your ability to name what you're smelling increase dramatically. So I highly, highly, highly recommend you use that tool. It doesn't have to be my wine aroma chart. You can download any wine aroma charts or wine aroma wheels or anything you want to call them. And that will help you dramatically to increase your proficiency in naming what you're smelling, just that act of practicing that craft. So the first wine that we are going to start out with is this wine right here. So this is Domaine Siret-Courteau, and this is their one from Cancy. And Cancy is the actual region. The actual producer is Domaine Siret-Courteau. And this is the 100% Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley. So if you haven't already, go ahead and pour yourself a big old glass of that. I'm using my nifty Coravin because I do not want to open up 4 bottles in one night by myself. Not that I couldn't finish them, but I've got a lot of work to do tomorrow. So I want to take it a little bit slower. While we go through the history of the grape and just kind of information about where Sauvignon Blanc originated from, feel free to just taste through this first wine because a lot of the history that we're going to be talking about is from this first wine. Throughout any of this, if you have any questions or tasting notes on these wines, just throw them up in the chat room and I will answer questions as they come about. So cheers, everybody, and happy, not so actually officially National Sauvignon Blanc Day, but for the Vinoculture Tribe, Sauvignon Blanc Day. So cheers. So Sauvignon Blanc, the grape variety itself, and so the grape variety just means that name of this specific vine and the grapes that it produces, is a very old grape variety. In fact, it's like parentage. They only know one parent that it had, so a genetic parent, because all grapes kind of stem from parents that crossbred and developed into new varieties, or a single variety that mutated and changed by itself without being crossbred and changed and developed its own. So we all kind of have, as grape varieties, this parentage and genetic history or genetic family tree. So one of its parents is Sauvignon, pretty old grape. So not Sauvignon, but Sauvignon, and so that's kind of where it comes from. The name Sauvignon comes from. That's Sauvignon. And that's the only parent we know of. So that dates back to like the 1300s. Actually, I'm sorry, the 1100s, like 12th century. So it's a very, very old grape variety, responsible for a lot of the world's grape varieties as a result of its progeny. So Sauvignon Blanc is the child of that. Sauvignon Blanc has also created quite a bit of its own family tree with its own crossbreeding as well. Most kind of, I guess, recognizably, Cabernet Sauvignon. So Sauvignon Blanc got together with Cabernet Franc and made its baby, Cabernet Sauvignon. And so Cabernet Sauvignon, one of the most prolific grapes in the entire world that we know of today, or that's most popular today, is the child of Sauvignon Blanc, a white grape, and Cabernet Franc, a red grape. So really interesting there. Sauvignon Blanc also has a bunch of like stepchildren, I guess you could say. Gruner Veltliner is one of those from Austria. If you've ever had Gruner Veltliner, another one of my favorite summer wines. Sylvaner from Germany. Verdejo from Spain, and Chenin Blanc also from France too. So it has lots of other stepchildren. This family tree is very large and complicated, but those are some of the most notable ones that I talk about frequently in these classes. So really interesting. It is quite possible that it's even the grandchild of Pinot, and we know of that as Pinot Noir specifically. But some of that is still debated because we don't really understand fully the genetic history of Sauvignon. So a little bit interesting how it's all connected, and pretty fascinating to see how one grape changed so much throughout the world. By the way, I'm not sure if this chat is working. If someone could just type something in the chat. Normally I have more people jumping in the chat room and telling me where they are, and I don't see anything in the chat. I just see my pin here. And so if you can just type something in the chat room so I know that my chat box is working. Hopefully it is. I'll come back to that in a second. I'll try and troubleshoot it to see if there's something I need to fix in that. So while y'all are sipping on this lovely Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley. So speaking of the Loire Valley, that is where this grape comes from. So most people actually talk about Sauvignon Blanc coming from France. That is true. But when they talk about it coming from France, they talk about the Bordeaux region. So here's France right here. This region right here, this kind of larger, broader, central West Coast France area of Bordeaux. Yes, there's a lot of Sauvignon Blanc grown here, but the actual native, and that's where the first like written history of the name Sauvignon Blanc comes from Bordeaux in about the 1500s, the early 1500s. But I'm sorry, I'm just getting all of my dates wrong today. Early 1700s, they talk about Sauvignon Blanc here. But earlier than that, they talk about a grape called the Fier, from the Loire Valley. So Loire Valley is right up here to the north of Bordeaux, also on that west coast, Atlantic influence area. Very spread out region, kind of curves around here, the Loire Valley tributary system. Covers about a third of the area of France. So just massive, massive land area. So that's the Loire Valley. So that's actually where it originates from, they say. So again, Sauvignon, its parent, crossbreeds with something else, creates a new profile or new genetic profile of a grape in the Loire Valley. And then it was literally just brought down to the Bordeaux region where it crossbred with Cabernet Franc to create Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Sauvignon was born in the Bordeaux district, but Sauvignon Blanc comes further north from the Loire Valley. All right, good. I'm glad the chat box is working. Hi, Amanda and John and Christine tuning in from Williamsburg. Great to see you all there. Hope you're enjoying some good old Sauvignon Blanc, maybe some Prisma Rosé, but hopefully it's good wine either way. Thanks so much for tuning in live. I appreciate it. So it is coming from France, and it is in France a very, very, very important grape. So probably I think the top 5 grape varieties grown all throughout France in just terms of like acres planted to vine, to the Sauvignon Blanc vine. So massive, massive, massive popularity in France itself. Has grown, though, and spread throughout the entire world, although most of its popularity is not in Europe. So it is grown in parts of Spain. It's grown in parts of Italy, the northern part of Italy specifically, grown a little bit in Germany and Austria, and some in the Balkans even, some in Greece. But most of its plantings throughout the entire world is in France and then also in the New World. So everything colonized. So everything in the Old World is basically Europe. The New World is everything that was colonized. So they learned their winemaking techniques from the Old World, from Europe, as colonization spread all sorts of things, good and bad, throughout the world. So Sauvignon Blanc has a very polarizing personality, right? It's like one of those people that you meet and that person, like, people either love that person or they really dislike that person. There's not a whole lot of middle ground. So if you poll like 10 people who really enjoy wine and you ask them, oh, do you like Sauvignon Blanc? Their answers are never like, yeah, sure. It's either, yeah, it's one of my favorite grapes, or no, I hate Sauvignon Blanc, because it has such a unique profile and a unique personality to it. So if you're one of those people that thinks you absolutely hate it, I challenge you to keep tasting a little bit, because there are probably examples of the grape that you would appreciate and enjoy, even if it might not be your favorite grape ever. And if you love the grape, awesome. Also challenge yourself to try different styles of the grape, because not all Sauvignon Blancs are created equal, which is what we will learn today. One of the things that I like about this grape is its name comes from sauvage, or as we would say, savage, which is the French word for wild. And that's because its grape leaves actually, and like the actual vine itself, resembles a wild grapevine instead of a Vitis vinifera grapevine, which is the genus and species of like what makes up all of our premium wines. But you just think of a wild grapevine, and if you've ever seen a wild grapevine, you know it's an invasive species, right? It just like literally could clip everything back, and within hours almost, it feels like those little spindly little arms are crawling everywhere and coming up everywhere. And that is what a grapevine is supposed to do, but the wild vines do it incredibly well. And so the Sauvignon Blanc grapevine itself is very vigorous in that way, not meaning it produces a lot of fruit. It actually produces a lower yield, meaning the actual berries it produces has a lower yield, because it spends most of its energy just trying to grow. So it's not trying to create grapes. It's like, no, I want to spread my arms. I want to grow. I want to touch the sky. That's what the grape does itself. So it's very vigorous in that way in terms of the actual shoots. The canes is what it's called, where the branches of the vine grow very, very vigorously. So the berries themselves are pretty small, and they're pretty tight clustered too. So lower yield, smaller berries, tighter clusters, which makes for pretty intense flavors. And that's because the lower the yield, the more intense the flavors are. Also, it produces a little bit more of an environment, or encourages or fosters a little bit more of an environment that's prone to some diseases that are prevalent in the wine world, the vine world, and that's botrytis specifically. So botrytis is called noble rot, and it's this fungus that grows around the grape clusters themselves, and it sucks out the moisture of the grapevines. It grows best in like humid conditions, and it like literally turns them into like shriveled, rotten raisins. Really terrible if you're not trying to make wine that has botryticized grapes. Really amazing if you are. So Sauvignon Blanc is made into some of the world's best dessert wines, especially when it's blended with a couple other grapes in the Bordeaux region in areas called Sauternes or Barsac, where Semillon makes up a big percentage of the blend too. And they actually look for these botryticized or rotten grape clusters and make wine out of those things. So it creates a very specific, distinct flavor profile. But if you're not making dessert wine, typically speaking, you want to try and avoid that. So you want to avoid super humid conditions. You want a little bit more windy areas. You want drier areas to make sure that that humidity doesn't rot out your fruit. So in the Bordeaux district, they want that, and that's why right along the rivers where they have a lot of that humidity and that kind of like dankness, perfect for conditions to make dessert wine. In the Loire River, further inland, the area that we're drinking from today is Cancé, and Cancé is right along this Loire tributary system, very, very, very far inland. Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé are right here as well. So it's just in the what they call Upper Loire or Central Loire even. And Central Loire doesn't mean because it's in the center of the Loire Valley. It means it's because it's in the center of France. So Cancé, or Cancy, sorry, I keep saying Cancé. Cancy is a tiny little region that 50 years ago was probably way more sought after than its sisters and brothers of the Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé districts in Loire Valley, just kind of south of Cancy. But in the last 50 years, Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé really grew in notoriety, and people sought after them a little bit more. And so those prices went up. Cancy's prices went down, even though they make really spectacular wines, still slightly different flavor profile than Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé, but really delicious wines. So let's talk about this region. This region has some like sandy, gravelly soils. There's a little bit of limestone in there, of course, and some clay sometimes, but it is hot and it has like really, really dry conditions. So, and by hot, I mean hot for Loire, right? This is not hot. This is not like Florida. This is one of the coolest regions because we're so far north in France. So it's a cool region, but it's hot in comparison to the other areas of the Loire. So it's the driest and hottest of Loire. So the fruit itself is going to ripen a little bit more, and it's going to ripen a little bit earlier. Which Sauvignon Blanc is an earlier ripening grape. And so it likes to be that earlier ripening grape. And it's going to create a little bit more. So if it's already earlier ripening, and because it's hotter and warmer, it's going to develop those like fruitier flavors faster, basically. And so that acidity is not going to be intense. So because, let me back up here, because Cancy is harvested about 2 weeks earlier than Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé, it is going to develop a little bit more of an opulent style of fruit, and the acidity of the wine is not going to be as austere, and the wine itself is not going to be as linear. So that's why I really like Cancy, because it has this approachability that Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé don't have always. Sometimes they can be so intense that unless I'm drinking it with food, and the right food specifically, they can be just a little intense. Cancy is a little bit more approachable, but still has loads and loads and loads of different layers of complexity of the wine. So let's get our noses in here and see what we're smelling. I really enjoyed this wine when I first found it, and super happy to share it with a bunch of people. Whew. So I'm getting this distinct flavoring of Sauvignon Blanc is typically a lot of these like citrus notes, of course, specifically leaning on the grapefruit side. Sometimes a lot of tropical fruit, and sometimes a little bit of melon, sometimes even borderline banana-esque. But depending on the region and the climate, it can vary drastically. So to me, I find that Sauvignon Blanc from Sancerre's or Pouilly Fumés definitely lean on that more like lemon pith, bitter grapefruit pith, that very austere, intense, bitter citrus notes. Cancy tends to have a little bit more of that pink grapefruit quality, a little bit more of like this Fiji apple thing. Definitely not intense on the tropical side. We're not getting banana and guava and mango, but there is a little bit of that more opulent fruit to it, which I really, really enjoy in this wine. So I'm going to give it a taste now. There's so much going on in this wine. Vibrant acidity. Sauvignon Blanc does have elevated levels of acidity. Just mouth-watering, refreshing acidity. As soon as you taste it, get a little bit of that pucker in the back of my mouth. My mouth is watering. It's begging me to take another sip, so I will because it's delicious also. But the overall body and texture of the wine is light, and specifically in the Loire Valley, the focus is on minerality on these wines. So it gets almost this like chalky sensation. So if you've ever volunteered or been charged with banging out the chalk erasers on recess, and you get that kind of chalky texture and taste in your mouth and nose, that's what these wines do a lot to me. Or if you're a weightlifter and you use chalk, or a rock climber and you use chalk and you get that chalk in your mouth. Or if you just go outside in the summertime after a rainstorm, that smell of the sidewalks and the asphalt after a thunderstorm has gone by, and it's like that rain is evaporating off of the sidewalks and the asphalt, that minerality, that's what we're talking about. It's this tactile sensation, almost like your tongue is tingling a little bit. It's this vibrancy of the wine that no, we are not actually tasting like chalk from limestone soils, but it's something related to the texture, the acidity, and the brightness of the wine. Sometimes people attribute it to more phosphorus and sodium in the soils. There's a lot of confusion still about what minerality is. It is not us tasting the actual rocks that the vines were grown in, but there is some correlation here that science really can't explain yet. So it's really fascinating. So in Cancy, we have a couple rules that make it important for making more flavorful wines. For one, irrigation is not allowed. So we said this is the driest area in the Loire Valley, meaning the least amount of rain. We do have a natural waterbed, so the vines themselves can dig down deep and get into this waterbed and get all of the water that they need, but it's not going to be from the surface from rainwater coming down. It's going to be from the vines digging down their roots deep into the actual waterbed. The reason why we have this rule, and I say we just because I'm drinking Cancy right now, I'm not from there, nor do I have any stake in those lands. But the reason why they have these rules is because the more the vine has to struggle to get to a water source down below, the less it is able to really focus on its vigorous growth, its vigorous spread of its vine shoots. Excuse me. My mouth is already scratchy today, so I'm going to be losing my voice all night, I think. I promise I don't have COVID. Excuse me. So as the vine is struggling to get its water source, which is where it gets all its nutrients, because its nutrients are from water-soluble nutrients in the soils, then it's not focused as much on its growth. So a vine itself is either going to focus its energy on root development to access water and nutrients, on vigorous growth of the actual vine above ground, or on grape production itself. Those are the only three things, and so the best balance in terms of the flavor of the wine and the actual balance of the health of the vineyard is when there's a good balance between all of those things. The more water you have, the more the vine is going to grow because it doesn't have to work those roots too much. The harsher the arid temperatures are, the more it's going to focus on all of its energy just to survive those roots. and it might not even have enough energy to produce enough grape clusters. So it's this perfect balance that you want in everything. And so that's why they have the rule in Cancy not to irrigate. It is not allowed because there is a natural waterbed. The grapevines can survive without it. Say in Washington State, where it's desert-like climate and there's less than 6 inches in some of these areas per year of rainfall, you can't have a rule where irrigation is not allowed. So this is not to say that all the best vineyards don't allow irrigation. It's all dependent on where you are from. So it's very, very relative. So don't take that away that dry farming means better wine. It just means that that area is conducive to dry farming, and dry farming makes better wine in that area. So irrigation is not allowed. Weeding in between the rows is also not allowed too. So you can't pull up any natural grasses and weeds and dandelions and flowers and herbs and stuff and shrubs that grow in between the rows. And that's because they want, again, that top layer of soil to be dried out. So you want the struggle and competition for water and nutrients on the top layer, because those weed roots are not going to go down 35 feet. They're going to go down, maybe 18 inches. But those vine roots can go down deep, deep, deep into the soil. And so if you create competition on the top layers by allowing those reeds and natural fauna to grow, natural flora to grow, then you're going to allow or push or encourage those vine roots to dig down deeper. So really interesting, all of the rules in this specific area to make sure that these wines produce high quality wines. But what I love about it is that they don't have really intense prices. So you could spend double the amount of money for a bottle of Sancerre or Pouilly-Fumé than you will for a bottle of Cancy. But it's harder to find because, again, it's not as sought after. So I highly recommend, if you want a really, really delicious bottle of Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley, look for something from Cancy. This is the label here, Domaine Siret Courteau. Cancy, this is their 2019 vintage. Really loving how this is opening up. There's a lot more like white floral notes in the wine too. A little bit of white peach. And maybe some really light melon notes to it, like almost like you bite too close to the core, to the rind of the actual melon. Super delicious wine. Cannot wait to enjoy this all summer long. I really went in with oysters. Just, classic, shallot mayonnaise sauce on top would be really, really delicious. So this particular vineyard, the vines are between 25 and 65-year-old. The estate was established in 2006, so a pretty young estate because the son joined his father, who took the vineyards over from his father, but then created his own estate on the side. So now it's like this co-produced father and son venture, which is a lot of fun. So, all right, we're going to go on to the next wine now. The next wine is from South Africa, the Benguela Cove. So this is the Benguela Cove. This is their Lighthouse collection. It is 100% Sauvignon Blanc, also from Walker Bay. Walker Bay is right on the Western Cape. So if you think Stellenbosch, which is a lot of what people know, it's about, 50 miles inland from Cape Town. So if you go 50 miles south of Stellenbosch, actually I think it's probably closer to 75 miles. I know this is all in kilometers, so now I'm trying to do math in my head. If you go south of that to Walker Bay, that is where we will be. So Walker Bay is actually one of the coldest wine regions in all of South Africa. Excuse me. So in the northern hemisphere, the further south you go, obviously the warmer you're going to be because you're closer to the equator. The southern hemisphere, the further south you go, the cooler you are, generally speaking, because the further away from the equator you are. Specifically speaking, though, Walker Bay has this really cold climate for more than just its southern location. There's a specific current that comes up from Antarctica. So it comes up from the south and hits this this cove of right in Walker Bay. And it chills down the air dramatically. So it creates these very, very cold winds. It's this turbulent, stormy area too, because these winds get so cold and it mixes with these hotter airs coming inland and from the north and from the east. And it creates this violent storms, very, very gusty winds, but these winds are very cold. So it chills down this specific area dramatically more so than any other areas around it. Really fascinating information there. A lot of rocky terrain, pretty high degrees of slopes too, and so it creates this like really great drainage. So even though there's quite a bit of clay in the soil, when that clay is mixed with gravelly soils and you have these high degrees of slope of the vineyards, it creates that drainage. So clay holds moisture. Remember, we don't want to hold too much moisture, but we want to hold enough so that the vine knows it's going to survive. This is important. So these that specific current coming from the Antarctica is called the Benguela current, and so that is what this cove is named after, and this winery is named after the Benguela Cove. So lighthouse collection, there is all these lighthouses throughout there because it gets so stormy and the rains can be so intense that you can't see these rocky cliffs in front of you. There's a lot of lighthouses all throughout there. So this is their lighthouse collection, meant to basically be their like approachable, everyday drinking wine. And that is what's in our glass right now, hopefully, if you have it. So let's taste this. This is a massive estate. So previously, when we were in the area of Loire Valley in Cancy, I'm going to say that wrong all night long now. We were talking about a very, very small estate with just a few acres. This estate is a 500-acre estate, massive. About 175 of those acres are planted to vine. About 25 of those acres are actually planted to olive trees. And the rest is basically like a winery farm. So there's a lot of just like natural open land there. So winemaker is Johan Faury. And they make quite a few different wines here, but Sauvignon Blanc grows really well because of its cooler climate. Let's get our noses here and see what we're smelling. I'm getting a little bit more of this grassiness. Maybe not even like fresh cut grass, but dried grass. Like you 3 days later are now raking the grass after you mowed the lawn. I'm getting a little bit more of this like bitter herbs. Again, a little bit more dried out. All of these like citrus skins and peels of the actual fruit. So not the juicy part of the fruit, but a little bit more of like the bitter side. So far on the nose, the wine is definitely more on that like savory side rather than that super opulent side. I'd say even more savory than the Loire Valley wine that we just tried. Whew. All right, let's taste. Wow. I am so impressed by this wine and how much it actually resembles something from the Loire Valley, just its linearness. It's a little bit more like streamlined, focused flavors of fruit. Still definitely approachable, but not as opulent, tropical, extravagantly extroverted as some other Sauvignon Blancs can be, especially from the South African wine regions. So still, it's not that New Zealand style, that all grapefruit, cat's pee, and gooseberry. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but definitely more citrusy, I think, than the wine from Loire Valley, and not as much of that Fiji apple notes. It's all of these bitter flavors on the wine. I'm really digging this. I want this with like fried shrimp. I just want something that like it gives something for this wine to kind of sink its teeth into. Typically, South African Sauvignon Blancs, if they're not in Loire Valley, are way more of that opulent style. But I really enjoy this cooler climate because I did a warmer climate in Loire Valley. I wanted to do a cooler climate in South Africa to feature. South Africa itself produces a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. So if you thought South Africa was all about Chenin Blanc and other things, then Sauvignon Blanc is actually the widest variety planted in all of South Africa for white grape varieties. I'm sorry, no, for all grape varieties. So beyond everything. So a lot of Sauvignon Blanc planted. There's a lot of just like cheaper stuff made into bulk, but there's some people that are producing some really higher end stuff as well. This particular Sauvignon Blanc was aged on the lees for 60 days. So it's just going to give a little bit more of that creamier texture. And there was some skin contact on the wine, which is what I think the bitter flavors are coming from. So typically speaking, when white wines are made, especially lighter style white wines, the grapes are picked, they're brought into the winery, they're pressed almost immediately, meaning like the juice is pressed off of, like through a colander almost, think, the skins of the grape. And then that juice is left to, typically speaking, they chill it down, do a cold stabilization process to basically make sure that it doesn't start natural fermentation. They keep it colder than what a wine would ferment at, maybe for a couple days, and then they'll start the fermentation process. All of the temperatures and stuff like that help create different flavors in the wine. So the wine flavor itself, yes, a lot of it comes from the climate that it's made and the style of the wine of the region. But the winemaker does have some leeway based on all of these factors, like the temperature that they chill it out, what happens in the winery once the grapes are processed. So they're doing something a little bit different here in Benguela Cove. They're allowing partial skin contact for a little bit of time to get some of those flavors. So the grapes are crushed with the skins, and some of those bitter phenolics of the skins get into the juice before it's pressed off and then stabilized and then fermented separately. So that is what's creating a little bit more of those bitter flavors. Wine was done in equal parts stainless steel fermentation and some of these massive 2,000-liter oak vats. So it does actually have some oak on it. No, you can't taste a lot of oaky flavors because it wasn't aged significantly with that. But it just basically, when you age your wine or ferment your wine in some oak, it reduces some of that, or minimizes, I should say, some of that reductive qualities of your wine, that the wine can smell a little bit like burnt cabbage or rotten eggs, that sulfur kind of compounds, because the wine was not exposed to any oxygen at all when it's in stainless steel. When it has some oak fermentation on it, it kind of minimizes any reductive flavors in the wine. And those 60 days on the lees I would be really, really interested to see what this wine tasted like without that, because if 60 days on the lees creates a little bit more of this creaminess, and this wine is already so linear, I'm glad they did that, because otherwise I think it would be too linear and too kind of focused and streamlined and sharp. So I like that the 60 days lees aging kind of softened the wine a little bit. So yeah, I'm digging that wine. I'm really digging that wine. All the pink grapefruit now is coming out a little bit more as the wine has warmed up and opened up in the glass. But it's definitely that like pink grapefruit pith. So you're getting closer to the membrane instead of like super juicy, fruity style. So, all right, we're gonna try the third Sauvignon Blanc, and that is the Tin Barn. We're gonna end on the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and you'll see why once it's in the glass. So, Tin Barn Vineyards, excuse me. Tin Barn Vineyards right here. It is from Sonoma Mountain, specifically Carneros. So if we had a map of California, which I wish I had right behind me because it would be so fabulous to demonstrate that. But Carneros is the bottom part of the V as Sonoma and Napa come down and form a and connect at the bottom. So Carneros overlaps, so both Sonoma and Napa. So Carneros is a cooler climate also, because also these currents coming in from the bay, cooling everything down. So the San Francisco Bay, we've all seen the pictures of the fog rolling in the afternoon. And so Carneros is the southernmost region. Again, that V. The V is the end of the San Francisco Bay. San Francisco Bridge, we see at 4:30 in the afternoon, this massive wall of fog rolls in and literally gets sucked up through the Sonoma Valley and through the Napa Valley. And here's how it works. So the valleys get warmed by the sun in the afternoon and warms up the air, like they're just baking. And so as that air bakes and it gets warmer, warm air rises, we know that. And as it rises, it creates a vacuum down below to suck in colder air. Well, this colder air is being sucked in from San Francisco Bay because these currents, again, just like we had currents from Antarctica coming up to South Africa, in California, you have currents from Alaska coming down the coast, so also very, very cold currents. So that air is much colder. So as the inland air is baking and warming, it sucks in the colder air, and that colder air, as it's cooling and condensing, it creates this fog, and the fog rolls in. The fog really helps create a kind of a cold blanket, if you will forgive me for mixing all of my phrases there. Not a warm blanket, but a cold blanket creates like this, you know, if you took a blanket, soaked it in water, put it in the refrigerator, and then put it on you, it's a blanket, but it's going to keep you colder than anything else. So that's what this fog is doing to the vineyards. If it were not for that, very, very different grapes would grow in the Sonoma and Napa valleys. So especially in Carneros, where it has the fastest for the fog to hit, because it's going to hit earliest in the afternoon, and the slowest for it to leave as the fog kind of sinks out in the morning and early afternoon. So some of these days in the middle of the growing season, the vines themselves are only getting direct sunlight for, 4 hours in the afternoon, from basically about like noon till 4. Dramatically different than in the north. So even in like Napa Valley, you have about 30 miles from the south to north, from Carneros to Calistoga. And from there, you have a 30-degree average daily temperature increase. So that is how much colder Carneros is than just 30 miles to the north in the north part of Napa. So Carneros is cold. And again, we know that cold climate is better for Sauvignon Blanc. So should stop talking and start pour this wine. By the way, if you've wondered about this contraption that I'm using, it is the Coravin. No, I do not own stock in the company. I make no commissions on selling this, but I think everyone should buy it. So it's not a gimmick, because there are a lot of gimmicks out there, but basically allows you to use a needle, pierce the cork, and extract wine through that needle, and it replaces the space from the wine that you've taken with argon gas, which is a non-reactive gas, and so it's not going to change the flavor of the wine. It's also not going to explode the bottle, because it's the same atmospheric pressure unit as oxygen. So that's important, not to have exploding bottles. By the way, if you have one and you're curious about what this is a screw cap adapter. If you haven't tried it yet, highly recommend it. It's made the world of difference to me, and being able to try so many wines throughout the day and not have to open up all these bottles. It works. I say it works for about a month. So I think these wines are good and stay the same for about 4 weeks, and then they start to taper off. If it's a regular cork and not using those screw cap adapters, then you're looking at, they say up to years. I have found it to be about 6 months before the wine starts to change and shift a little bit. So that's that one. So now we're tasting a Sonoma Mountain Sauvignon Blanc. Typically speaking, California Sauvignon Blancs tend to be a little bit richer, a little bit more on that creamier style, a little bit more on the melon flavors, with riper tropical fruits, riper citrus notes. Oftentimes, California wines will, California Sauvignon Blancs will be aged in oak, sometimes even blended with Semillon like they do in Bordeaux, so it's a little bit more of a Bordeaux style than a Loire style. In this case, we do have some oak on it, but it's neutral oak, so it's not imparting oaky flavors. Again, it's just minimizing the reductive flavors that come from zero oxygen environment during the fermentation process. So this wine specifically was aged equal parts in 3 ways. So the previous one was equal parts in 2 ways, stainless steel and these large oak casks. Here we're in 3 ways. We've got cement eggs as the third. So talk about that just a second. So there's stainless steel, there's neutral oak, and then the cement eggs. So basically these eggs are basically large eggs. We're talking, 6 feet to 12 feet tall, very large, and they're just like slightly rounded, but wider on the bottom, still rounded at the top. So it's in the shape of an egg. And it creates a natural style of circulation inside the egg for it to ferment. So as it ferments and carbon dioxide develops as a byproduct, it creates these bubbles. So it starts bubbling almost like it's going to start boiling. And it's going to start circulating because of the shape of the egg. So you never actually have to stir the wine. It's really fascinating what the shape itself does. But because the concrete is a little more porous, those carbon dioxide bubbles are going to stick to the outside, just kind of making sure that everything is really, really well-rounded. So it's not going to taste like cement or concrete or anything like that. It's just creating this like really well-balanced wine because of the way it circulates naturally without stirring during the fermentation process. So that's Tin Barn. They only make single vineyard wines, so all of their wines are coming from specific places where they think are perfectly conducive to whatever grape they're growing. High Vista Vineyard is a cool region, of course, in Carneros, which is a cool region within the base of Sonoma and Napa. I love the melon notes on this wine. Michael Lancaster is the winemaker and owner of this Tin Barn Vineyards project. They don't actually own their own vineyards. They source their fruit from vineyards. They partner with these people who've been working these vineyards for years and years and years. So the people who've been working this vineyard, High Vista Vineyard, been there for 25 years. So Tin Barn has been around, I think, for about 20 years or so, and they might have changed their different sources of fruit. But I know they've been working with High Vista Vineyards for a while. And Sauvignon Blanc is just like really, really well grown here. I've literally never had anything by Tin Barn that wasn't super delicious and tasty. Amanda Sable says number 1 is the best so far. The Kunsi. Curious to see as we taste number 3 and number 4 if that holds true. We will find out. So let's taste this Tin Barn. Much creamier, right? Instead of that bitter, pithy part of the citrus fruit, I'm almost getting more like lemon curd, lemon bar, lemon meringue, with more of those apple notes like we had in the Loire Valley. Definitely none of those bitter notes we had in the Walker Bay in the South African wine. And this just lots of honeydew, melon note, and this creamier texture. Wildly different. Hard to believe that this is the same wine, or the same grape, but that's just how dramatically different Sauvignon Blanc can be when it's grown in different climates. So if you wait too long to pick your Sauvignon Blanc, you get very bland flavored wines. So notice already that this acidity is much lower than the first two because they're waiting longer. They're letting the grapes ripen on the vine for longer into the season than the previous 2 wines that we tasted did. But if you pick it too young, what you have with Sauvignon Blanc is specifically this flavor of ammonia, or cat pee is what it's often called in the Sauvignon Blanc world, or boxwood, or any of these just like cat's pee on the gooseberry bush, which is what the classic descriptor was, especially in the 1990s as New Zealand started making all of their Sauvignon Blancs and really putting Sauvignon Blanc onto the world map in a different way. And that's if you pick them too early. And here's why that is. Whenever you're ready, you could just go ahead and pour that next wine. This is Chilean, is how this is pronounced. I know it's not an SH, but it's a Celtic word, I believe, and Chilean is actually how it is pronounced. So this is their Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough, New Zealand. They're also their 2019 vintage. So we have 2019 for all of these except for the Walker Bay was a 2020 vintage. So just FYI. So if you pick Sauvignon Blanc grapes too early, they're already early ripening, but if you pick them too early, or if you just mass harvest everything at once when half the grapes are ripe, but half the grapes are still a little bit underripe, then what you get are these volatile thiols. And I think is how it's pronounced. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but volatile thiols. These are specific compounds. They are formed after fermentation occurs. And here's how they form. So this interaction between the yeast itself that was used as the fermentation. So fermentation 101, yeast, it's the sugar of the grapes. The byproduct is alcohol, gets us drunk. Carbon dioxide creates sparkling wines if you don't let the gases, if you trap the gases. Sulfur dioxide, a bunch of other different things, but mostly those things. So the yeast of the fermentation process, after it's done, becomes what we call lees. Still hangs out. It's still there. It's still technically there. And there's sulfur found in these lees as part of the byproduct of the fermentation. So there's this interaction then between the yeast and the sulfur that if the grapes weren't picked at the right time, and it's the right combination of this yeast strain, and there are these enzymes present, and the fermentation conditions are correct, then you get this ammonia smell. That's very, very intensely found in a lot of specifically New Zealand style Sauvignon Blancs, or specifically just New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. So that's part of the reason that causes those. Another reason that causes some of those green grassy flavors, so that's that ammonia kind of flavoring. Those greener, grassier, like herbaceous, peppery styles of Sauvignon Blancs, that's from methylpyrazines. So methylpyrazines are, again, these compounds, these phenols that are found both in green bell peppers. They're in there too. They're found in ladybugs, oddly enough, and they're also found in specific grape varieties, not all of them, but Sauvignon Blanc is definitely one of them. Cabernet Franc also, Cabernet Sauvignon also, because it is the child of two parents who also had these methylpyrazines in the grape variety. And that's what creates that peppery, that green bell pepper, that jalapeno pepper, not black pepper, not that kind of pepper, but these bell pepper, grassy, green, herbaceous notes in the wine. So those will be more prominent, again, if you harvest those grapes a little bit too early. So it all depends on when you harvest the grapes and the fermentation conditions and all the yeast strains and all of those things that kind of create this very specific style that many New Zealand producers have kind of embraced because it became so characteristic of its personality, of that grassy, grapefruity, cat's pee kind of wine. I tend to not love the smell of cat pee, so that's not the style I like to go for. I love the vibrant, peppery, grassy side of things, and I love the grapefruit side of things. So I don't mind the methylpyrazines, but I tend to avoid New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs that have too many of the flavor profiles that come along with those volatile thiols. So let's see about Chilean and see what they have. Let's see if I picked out something that's super grassy and grapefruity. See if I picked out something that was more tropical style, meaning that they let those grapes ripen a little bit longer. Maybe they ripened too long and it became flabby and boring. Maybe there are too many of these volatile feels in there and there's a lot of ammonia. Let's see. I didn't pick any volatile feels. So I picked a wine that to me is, if I want to drink a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, this is what I want. So it's the tropical side of it. It's so much guava, you can't even like wrap your brain around how much guava can be in here when the wine isn't made from guava. Lots of grapefruit, but none of the bitter parts of grapefruit. And has these like bell pepper, jalapeno, spice notes in there, maybe even a little bit of ginger, like pickled ginger, like you would have on your sushi platter. Maybe even like pickled or candied, not pickled, candy. So you got pickled ginger in there. I think there's like this candied lemon rind on this Chenin that I think is so delightful. But all of the ruby red grapefruit that you can imagine, with like that sweet grapefruit that you'd want to make a Paloma cocktail out of. And if you haven't had a Paloma cocktail, find a cocktail bar near you that can serve you a Paloma cocktail, because basically this in a glass. But so I lived in Peru for a while. I moved to Peru when I was 18 years old, and every morning I just walked down to the market. I lived in Lima, so it wasn't in the jungle, but they had these like markets that brought fresh fruit in and fresh vegetables from the jungles in all the time. And you just like walk in, just the smell of the market when you get these like freshly picked, fully ripened mangoes and guavas and papayas, all of these flavors that I have never since tasted the exact same thing or smelled the exact same thing in the United States, because all of our fruit was picked too early in these tropical countries and then shipped in, and so it just didn't develop those ripened flavors. So if you ever get a chance to try or travel to a tropical country, make sure you take the time to smell the fruit there, because it's unlike anything you will have ever had. When you smell the actual naturally ripened fruit of a tropical country. So there's so much guava and papaya and all of the grapefruit and lime zest in here. Really, I think I could drink this all summer long and be perfectly happy. So wildly different than the first three. Let's taste. Wow. It's just in your face grapefruit. All that grapefruit kind of like hangs out on the tongue. And then as that grapefruit kind of settles down, that acidity softens, that's when I get the guava and the papaya, a little bit of like green banana in there as well. So really dynamic, really complex, but very bold flavors. So if you don't like tropical or citrus flavors in your wine, I would highly not recommend this wine. But if you do, this is like the only wine you need to drink. This is pretty bold and extroverted wine. I think I wrote in my tasting notes that this wine is so extroverted that you can hear the flavors, is how loudly they are jumping out of the glass. And I'm sticking to my guns on that one, because yeah, you can hear the grapefruit and guava and papaya on this wine. Really, really delicious and really just totally unique. I think that part of the reason that Sauvignon Blanc is named because of its wild leaves, I think the flavor profiles also tend to be so wild and unique and distinctive for Sauvignon Blanc. It's like once you smell a Sauvignon Blanc, like it's hard to like unsmell it, or it's hard to confuse the Sauvignon Blanc grape with anything else because it is so distinctive. So I appreciate that about it. It's never trying to be anyone other than who it actually is, and I love people who do that. I love countries who do that, wine regions that do that, who just embrace all of their weirdness, all of their uniqueness, and just run with it. And that's what I think Sauvignon Blanc does. So whether you like the Caspian, the gooseberry bush style, totally cool. Like everyone likes what they like. Whether you like the really lean, austere, mineral-driven styles of Sancerre, Puy, Fruit May, maybe you like the oaky, creamy styles, rich styles of the Bordeaux. Maybe you like the melon-driven styles of California. The could be anything from South Africa, or the lighter, softer, silkier style from California. Could be any of those styles or all of those styles or none of those styles. Just keep trying new wines. Keep embracing the expansion of your palate to see what comes your way, and enjoy the journey that it has you on it. So Amanda and John says number 1 and 4 in a dead heat at our house. I love it. I would agree with you. I think I get the luxury of only picking wines that I love for my job because I answer to no one. And so I pick all of these because I love them in different ways. But I think if I'm just like drinking by the pool, I want the Chilean. I think if I'm having it with some food, like grilled fish, I want the first wine from Loire from Cancy. I think if I want like swordfish with pineapple saucer or something like that, a little bit of a steakier thing, I'd want that Tin Barn. And I think that Lighthouse Collection from Walker Bay, from the Benguela Cove, I want with oysters. I just really want with oysters, that classic shallot mignonette sauce. So all 4 very different wines. I hope this expanded your palate and expanded your horizons and expanded your idea of what the Sauvignon Blanc grape is, what it can be, what it should be, and what you should, how you should think about it and enjoy it, and reach for that Sauvignon Blanc when you might not have before. Really look forward to next week's class. Next week's class is all about Grenache. We are going to be trying a white, a rosé, and 2 different reds, all about the Grenache. So just like Sauvignon Blanc had a genetic mutation, I don't think we even talked about this at the beginning, where we talked about the genetic parentage. It's its parents and its children, its progeny. Sauvignon Blanc also has genetic mutations, so it turned into Sauvignon Blanc Gris, where the grape started turning a little bit more gray in color. Also Sauvignon Rouge, where it actually turned fully red, but it was the same DNA as Sauvignon Blanc. Really fascinating. Grenache has done the same thing. So genetic mutations of Grenache turn it into Grenache Noir. From Grenache Noir, it mutated to Grenache Gris, Grenache Blanc, and lots of different styles of wine are made as a result of that. So that's next week's 4-pack. Really excited about that. And I'm going to be taking a break for a couple of weeks in July. And pretty soon we're going to be starting real live in-person classes. My virtual classes will still be filmed, but they won't be. They'll be filmed in advance and just uploaded rather than live style. So, but for right now, still doing live virtual classes on YouTube. And that's it. If you have any ideas about other classes that you'd like to see or other wines you'd like featured, please let me know. And until then, enjoy the weekend. Happy Father's Day to you or the fathers in your lives, and enjoy some great Sauvignon Blanc over the weekend, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.